alternative. They can use science, and science makes sense, right? If that's the way you want to understand it, you follow the physical laws, and it kind of makes sense. Maybe it doesn't answer everything, but it gives you some basis. Back then, there was no science. There was no other way to explain anything except through divine intervention. Okay? If you are pagan or polytheists, you believe in many gods. So what happens when you believe in many gods? Mars has a competition with Apollo, and they get Athena involved, and so. And there's a whole thing going on, right? And sometimes these people win, sometimes these people win. It's not really that important because there's a whole bunch of them anyhow, right? So this guy's down, this guy's up. There's still somebody there, and somebody who's going to take care of it. In monotheism, that doesn't exist. There's only one God. God who creates everything, who sustains everything. When the temple gets destroyed for the Jews, their world collapses. Think if right now gravity would stop functioning. Gravity stops. You cannot do anything. These wheelchairs would not work. You couldn't move them anywhere. We couldn't drive in the bus. You couldn't go to the bathroom because you couldn't flush the toilet. You couldn't cook anything. There would be no way for you to function in that world because everything that you knew all of a sudden doesn't work. And that's what happens to the Jewish people when the temple gets destroyed. This is God, and God resides here, and his temple was destroyed. What does that mean? How do you understand anything now? Now, it's not a question of worship. It's not a question of offering sacrifices. Everything that has to do with the way you understand the world is into that temple. And it's been destroyed. And who destroyed it? A bunch of pagans. Those are the guys that we saw in Caesarea Philippi who bury dancing goats. When the temple gets destroyed, and guys, everybody who is following Jesus is thinking in this way. Because that's what the temple means to them. People following Jesus, it's a little bit easier because they have an answer. And the answer is that the Father, the Lord, no longer functions through that stuff, through the physical offering of sacrifice, but through the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus. But they're still all Jews. This happens very close to after when Jesus is crucified. We're not talking about 400 years later. We're talking about only 30 years later. Well, more than that. 40 years later. We're talking about only 40 years later. And so the whole theology isn't completely developed yet. But for the Jews, when the temple is destroyed, their world collapses and they have no way to explain anything. They have no idea what's going to be. And they simply don't know how to function. If we don't offer sacrifices, then how do we atone of sin? What do we do? Who knows? Who's allowed to know? Because not only do they destroy the temple, they destroy the Sanhedrin, which is the great court of the Jewish people. Those guys are gone now. Also, there's 120